Our next reader has been trapped on planet Earth since 1973. His prose and translations have appeared in such places as Quarterly West, St. Petersburg Review, Reimagine, Stir Journal, Antique Women, The Good Men Project, and other publications. His novel, The Fugue, was a finalist for the 2016 Chicago Writers Association's Book of the Year Award, and he has copies here for sale if you're interested. He lives in Oak Park with his family. Please welcome Gint Aras. Good height? Yeah, you can.
Oh yeah, I can do that. That's the easiest part. Is adjusting this. My publisher and the owner of Tortoise Books has brought copies of The Fugue all the way from Siberia today. And so we need to reward his efforts by purchasing them. I'm going to read an excerpt from a memoir in progress. I'm almost finished with it. The manuscript is essentially done. I'm just cleaning it up, and by the end of the year, I'm going to be pitching it to places. And it's this is an excerpt from a memoir that's it's about my upbringing in Cicero, and my elders and most of the neighbors that I lived with were World War II refugees. The focus in this book is on Cicero's racism and the lessons that shaped my mind and that filled it with hatred. I learned to fear and hate outsiders, but it also struck me, even in childhood, that obviously World War II was a racist conflict itself, and that while my elders had suffered from racism and from xenophobia of all forms, they embraced it. And decades later, they voted for a fascist. So the book, tentatively titled Ghetto Blue Blood, Admissions of a Racist, wrestles with those contradictions that I faced as a member of a racist community, but also a person who obviously studied the humanities as a college student and now as a teacher and a writer. Just before this excerpt, just before the moment that I'm going to read to you, I narrate about a moment that I had in college when I was 18, during which I learned for the first time this idea that race is a construct. Okay, and this was a moment for me personally that was really moving and really transformative for my consciousness. And because I learned that this idea that race was a construct, which contradicted almost everything that I had learned as a child. As a child, I had learned that race and ethnicity were fixed points, right? That they were finite, that they could be measured. I naturally asked other questions. For example, is ethnicity also then and therefore a construct? And is my identity as a Lithuanian American, as a son of refugees, also something that has been constructed? And who constructed it? And so that question was in my mind when, for the first time in my life, I went to Lithuania as a 19-year-old. And that's what I'm going to read for you today. It's about a 10-minute excerpt. All right. So this is from a chapter called Interdependence. I was 19 when I visited Lithuania for the first time in the summer of 1992, part of an excursion as a member of a Lithuanian folk dance group. We took with us a nearly 2-hour-long dance program to be performed on stages in Vilnius, Kaunas, and a handful of other places. Of course, Lithuania had just come out of a revolution, the first domino in the collapse of the Soviet Union. It had cost lives, and the damaged buildings, trashed cars, and remains of barricades were available in plain view. People were trying to figure out what it meant to live in a new political and economic system, dealing with their own questions of loss and fear. Yet here we were, an amateur ensemble of teen Americans, all of us convinced Lithuanians couldn't wait to see us stage polka routines left over from the mid-1930s. I believed Lithuanians loved the national dance, folk music, and costumes the same way Americans loved Coca-Cola and MASH. In the diaspora, the national costume was vital to Lithuanian identity, right alongside knowledge of the songs, dances, and language. My Lithuanian grammar and songbooks showed pictures of gorgeous blonde Lithuanian country kids sitting under hazelnut trees and dressed in colorful sashes, their baskets full of mushrooms and wild berries. Birdies and squirrels sat so close to the kids that you thought they could speak to the animals. In Vilnius, the first young people my troop saw were teenage thugs busting faces in the packed dirt of our dormitory yard. We had just gotten off the bus from the airport, had not even oriented ourselves to the dorm's elevators and cafeteria. The fist fight was as brutal as any I had witnessed in Cicero, and it lasted a good while, guys coming away with bleeding eyes and mouths. After the scene cleared, a few thugs sat on the dorm stairway, one of them wrapping a bleeding fist with strips of dirty cloth torn from a shirt, and the boys planned, in language peppered with Russian swears, to get a bigger band together, best their adversaries next time. The dorm staff paid no attention to these boys. In only a few days, virtually every pastoral story I had heard about the old country, every painting and drawing I had ever seen, was obliterated to myth and outright contrivance. I learned I spoke a weird version of Lithuanian, undeveloped since 1945. And I often used English syntax filled with Lithuanian words. Dozens of my common expressions, never corrected at home or in Lithuanian school, were unfortunate. The word I used for toilet was the equivalent of outhouse. And I said ass when I meant rear, as in, there's an empty seat in the ass of the bus. Or, we can enter the building through its ass. Very few people in Lithuania owned any national costumes. They ate far more than dumplings and boletus mushrooms. Young people drank some weird greenish thing called šaltukas, and they liked pizza with eggs and fish, poured ketchup on it. For dinner, they fried chicken, stewed vegetables, and made soup by boiling bones. The best meal I had was shashlikai, or shish kebabs, skewered pork grilled over open coals, eaten near a lake, outside Dolgai, where I happily got sweaty in a sauna, drunk and naked to jump, pink as a steamed grouper, into the cool green water. Then I sat that night pounding moonshine someone's uncle had made in his garage, fielding questions about whether I knew Michael Jordan, and if I had ever ridden in a Cadillac or any other convertible. People were endlessly curious to know if I considered myself American or Lithuanian. Some of these discussions turned into fierce arguments, and there was no pleasant way to answer the question. If I claimed to feel Lithuanian, they'd protest, explain that I could never be real, even if I took a Lithuanian passport or moved to Vilnius. If I claimed to feel American, they'd accost me. How could I feel close to a nation of mongrels who had no culture of their own? I realized these people saw themselves as true, and I should have been aspiring to their truth while knowing I could never achieve it. America was a construct, but Lithuania remained fixed as the chemical properties of gold. Their identity's truth gave them authority over me, left them authentic, while I remained false, even if, ultimately, there was something about the story of American identity they coveted, unaware that I'd been trained to covet a story myself, one falling apart because of my conversations with them. Only the rarest person in Lithuania, a hip aunt and a professional actor who knew my parents, could listen to me wonder about the fluid nature of ethnicity, its construction, its capacity to change and collapse in an instant. The Soviet Union no longer existed, yet its consequences were everywhere, including a cold and rigid mentality that drew lines between people clear as fences between yards. Still, the mentality was quickly changing, and young people felt the freedom to reject it. Their protests took cues from the symbols of alternative identities available in media. Many of these seemed American to me. A young kid thinks, who am I? I'm someone who now chews gum on the public bus and puts his feet up on chairs. I grew up near the Vilnius train station, and I listen to rap music, tag walls, tilt my cap sideways, wear baggy pants, and ride a skateboard. I wear thick metal necklaces, and I jack my elbows sideways when I talk. It struck me in Vilnius to feel I identified with hip-hop as American, as mine. In Chicago, I enjoyed and admired the music, but would never have claimed possession, and I would not have felt represented by Run DMC or the Beastie Boys. In Lithuania, various forms of pop culture, but especially hip-hop and metal, represented rebellion against Soviet demarcation of norms and affinities, even if that mentality revealed itself when cliques of thugs used musical groups to determine friend from foe. The Depeche Mode crew, Depeshiste, battled the Metallica crew, Metaliste. And they went around town crossing out each other's graffiti, occasionally busting faces in courtyards or parks. I met an unfortunate fan of Queen, who hated Michael Jackson fans because he thought they were all gay. I said nothing to that person. I could have said to them, "You're uninspired, you're unoriginal." Admittedly, I did get into those kinds of discussions, yet the concept of originality had left me scrambling for footing, because nothing I had learned, no part of the story of identity I had inherited, seemed to hold up anymore. One night, I got accosted by a stranger. We were in Palanga, a resort town on the coast of the Baltic Sea. My dance troupe had completed our performance in an outdoor venue, and we were presently partying in our dorm, where other young people were staying, most on vacation. We naturally attracted attention. Loud Americans who rudely bought champagne and beer by the caseload, said strange things like, "The outhouse is in the ass." Exotic, we also disappointed. People had heard so much about Americans, but our bunch offered no Shannon Doherty or Johnny Depp, just students who practiced folk dancing and thought others should care about it. One wiry guy in a training suit, perhaps in his early 20s, didn't bother with any introductions, but just helped himself to beer and vodka, ate bread and sausage, and kept asking for cigarettes. He would open beer bottles by jamming them against windowsills, and one time used his teeth. The guy learned I was from Chicago and kept pestering me about the Bulls. Why didn't I attend all the matches? Why hadn't I brought Bulls hats and jerseys to sell in Lithuania? We were pretty drunk when he asked me, "So, do you consider yourself Lithuanian or American?" "I'm both," I said. "You can't be both." "I can, I'm both." "That's stupid. That's impossible." "It isn't." "So, what makes you American?" This was unusual. Lithuanians usually started from the Lithuanian end and worked back to prove my Americanness to me. Now I was a bit befuddled. I said, "I was born there." "That doesn't mean you're American. There are Russians born in Vilnius. If my mother had given birth to me in Poland, I would still be Lithuanian." "Well, I'm from there. I think like an American." "What is that? What are American thoughts?" "You know, individualism and independence are important to me." "So what? Those are myths. And they're important to everyone." I said, "Yes, but I'm independent, and I'm an individual." A laugh bellowed out from deep in his guts, and the guy looked at me as if I was the most pitiful idiot he had ever seen. "How," he asked, "is it possible for you to be independent?" I wanted to tell him I support myself, but my Lithuanian stumbled. I ended up saying, "Aš susimoku." I pay my way. "You pay? Really?" He poured about 100 grams of vodka into a beer glass and pushed it toward me, right to the edge of the table. "And where do you get money?" "I work." "Ha!" he shouted, raising his glass. "You mean you're a slave to some pizdukas? Some pizdukas owns what, a store? Where do you work?" "Well, I quit before the trip. I used to drive pizzas." "What freedom! You drove pizzas for some pizdukas. So you're an independent American who pays his way. Blat, let's drink." We shut down the warm vodka. "Today," he said, "I learned we're all Americans." Tomorrow I'll get my American passport. I'll bring receipts to show all I've purchased. "What's all this to you? Why do you care who I am or what I think?" I asked. He said he didn't give a fuck. Man pochui. America didn't matter to him. Bidideo en todo Americos. The guy took a bottle from the table and he pressed my shoulder to stand up. You don't have to convince anyone you're American. The stupidity gives it away. You can't tell propaganda from a panda. So congratulations, American. You're the dumbest person I've ever met in my life. And after that, I never saw him again. Thanks.